Welcome to the Back in Business podcast with me, Liz Barkley, and him, Mickey Clark.
Yeah, and it's been a busy week, particularly for our Chancellor with his make or break summer budget. I must say before we kick off though, Liz, the hair is looking wonderful. All that fuss, all that anguish that we had last week and the week before.
That's the first time you've said anything nice to me in the 27 years I've known you, but it was a shaggy dog story. It was, my fringe was right down to my nose. And I don't know if you noticed this, but in high streets up and down the land on Saturday, there were queues outside the barber shops. It was the barber shops that everybody was flocking to get into.
And I noticed the weekend papers were carrying pictures of before and after, you know, people before they'd had their hair cut and after the event. And some of them are pretty impressive. Not saying I'd have to worry too much about. But yeah,
but you need a polish.
I'll short back and polish every time. Yeah. Doesn't cost me anything that way.
But you went to the pub, or you were intending to go to the pub. Did you? How was it?
Yeah, I went twice actually. I was a bit dubious about it, and we went out for a meal on Saturday night, and the governor came up as soon as we got there. He's lost a stone in weight during lockdown. He's looking a lot better. Made us friendly. He had a bar there, temporary bar, barrels of beer stacked up. Everything was on tap and ready to go. He had a few people there just drinking casually in one bit of the marquee, and then you went through to the back and there was a restaurant section with heaters and people actually sitting there having their meals. And the waitresses had it off, you know, they had it off to a T. They were up and downstairs bringing stuff out. It was piping hot. I couldn't fault it. I'm not saying it's something I do every week. And the weather wasn't that great. And that makes me worried about going forward. If this continues, what are we going to be doing come October, November time?
Yeah, precisely what you said last week. The weather's not going to hold out just because we need to be in a marquee in a pub garden. And we're going to be talking to Jenny Baish, the landlady of the Barley Mow in Maidenhead shortly, because she opened this week too. But of course, the other thing that was in the spotlight this week was the announcement from Oliver Dowden, the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and he talked about theatre and the arts and handing 1.6 billion roughly to that sector. And we are going to be talking to the actor Adam James shortly and to Zoe Kerno, who runs the Minack Theatre in Cornwall. But before we do that, Simon McVicker, our Director of Public Affairs Policy and Communications is here. Simon, what's your take on everything that's been announced this week?
Well, I think that Mickey's right. I think the task ahead of the Chancellor is so huge that I think the measures that he announced this week are just simply inadequate. I mean, just yesterday we've lost almost 10,000 jobs in the retail sector, and they're warning of a tidal wave of job losses in the retail sector coming. And I mean, I know the Chancellor is well intentioned, but I just found some of his proposals rather gimmicky and really not going to solve the problem of getting this economy going again. So I think we've got a long way to go before we're out of this.
Do you get the impression, Simon, that some companies are saying, blow the Chancellor, we're going to do our own thing and we're going to prepare for a scenario 6 months, a year down the line where we've got to be fit and mean and we've got to keep costs down to a minimum? We're going to shed jobs because we believe that puts us in a healthier financial situation, and we're not going to rely on a revival of the economy that they keep talking about and the prospect of, getting away with a second wave.
Well, that might be true with the big companies because, they've got the ability to think further ahead. But I don't think it's like that with small businesses and freelance people.
Well, they feed off the back of big business, of course.
Yeah, they do. But, they're also day-to-day survival people, looking for the next contract here and there. And, I think it's very hard to plan so far ahead when you're a small business. So I'm not that optimistic at the moment.
Well, I'm not very optimistic about the chances for some of the freelancers either. But of course, the argument is that freelancers will put things on hold, bounce back, start up again, and be there ready with their skills and their knowledge and experience when the bigger firms need those skills. But is that the case?
Yeah, if they're still going at that stage. I mean, the self-employment scheme ends next month, and there's nothing in the pipeline for freelancers, no help at all from the government, and these people, are going to have to pay their mortgage and their gas bills and like everybody else. I just really don't know how people are going to survive in the short term.
And I'm really worried about that. But then, of course, there was some good news this week. Oliver Dowden's speech yesterday covered outdoor theatres, indoor gyms, sports facilities, etc. In England. And of course, we've got to be really wary about this because Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, we're all reopening at different times. But there was some good news, was there not, Simon?
Yes, I think they're opening the bits of the economy that we thought might have opened at the beginning of July. But I like the Regent's Park Outdoor Theatre. I went onto their webpage immediately to see whether they were going to do anything this summer, and they've said the season cancelled. So it's a little bit late. But for the beauticians and people like that,
Simon, even if they do open up, Simon, unless they've got an audience that's going to sit cheek by jowl. They're going to see a big drop in income, whether they open up or not. It might not be economically worthwhile them opening up.
Well, that's what Back in Business has been saying. We need to see the theatres opening. That's the only solution to helping them. But can I just say one thing? There was one person that's done really well out of this week. It's the Chancellor himself. YouGov have a poll out showing that 60% back his measures and think he's doing a good job. So Rishi's on the rise.
Well, I just noticed all those headlines, the meal deal, etc. headlines, and my headline would have been, "Who's going to do the washing up? Who's washing the dishes?"
Who's going to pay the bill? Wait till the taxes go up and see how popular he is then.
I think you're right. I think we'll see what he's like in 6 months' time.
Okay, we're going to talk about theatres because we've got Zoe Currow from the Minack Theatre in Cornwall, and we've got Adam James, who is a theatre actor, both with us. But just let me tell you, I don't know if you remember, but we had Sue Routledge, who is a beautician, on the programme a couple of weeks ago, and again she talked to us last week. But of course, beauticians have now heard that they can open to a certain extent. So Sue emailed me this morning and she said, "I think the whole beauty industry was so excited, eagerly awaiting the announcement, but then a bit of a shock. Because after 3.5 months, the government gave us only 3 days notice that we can open and then placed lots of restrictions around what we can do. So like many, I'm still in limbo because 80% of my salon's work involves facial treatments, and only treatments allowed in the UK currently are on hands, feet and body, with no date for the restrictions to lift." So Sue, still in that limbo. She says, "I now have to decide whether to partially reopen at a loss or remain closed. But it is fantastic news for many salons and nail bars, and I do feel that now we're going in the right direction, just a bit slower than we might have anticipated."
Simon, this is all boiling down to the problem of money, isn't it, basically? Whether people are employed or on furlough, the furlough comes to an end in October. There is going to come a crunch point at some time this year, whether or not businesses can survive.
Absolutely. And I think that particularly the small businesses, of course, there's some gossip in the press today that the furlough scheme is actually helping the big businesses because it's giving them money for jobs that they were going to keep anyway. So I just think that the whole statement on Wednesday lacked a small business perspective, and maybe that will come in the autumn. Maybe that's what he'll talk about in the autumn. But I think on Wednesday there was very little for small businesses, and for self-employed, absolutely nothing.
What do you make of this giveaway that the papers were full of? The the £10 off a meals, family of four saving 40 quid. When I looked at it closely, it's for Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. Yes. If you're in that game, and we'll have an expert in a minute who's more enlightened than me, that is the time you don't go to the pub or the restaurant. If they'd have said we're going to do that on a Friday, Saturday or Sunday, I perhaps would have given it more credence. But people aren't going to rush out just to save 10 quid on a Monday night.
Maybe that's the point. Maybe they want you to go out on a Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. But I just took it that Richie had a photo op all set up around that, and it was just a total gimmick. And I don't see how this is seriously going to help the restaurant businesses. They're going to need a lot more than that.
Well, let's bring in one of our guests now, Zoe Curnow from the Minack Theatre Trust. And I picked on this one because I've actually been there. I was very impressed with what I saw. Hello, Zoe.
Hi there.
How's things shaping up? You ready to roll? You got your first production ready? How many guests can you have? How much in the audience?
Yeah, so we've actually been open since July the 4th because we also operate as a visitor attraction as well as a theatre. So we've had over 2,000 visitors in this week. They've all been pre-booking, and we're actually just pushing the numbers on that a little bit for next week to see if we can cope with an extra. We're doing 50 per half an hour, so we're pushing it to 60 just to see if we can cope with all the measures in place with a few more. Obviously, the main driver for that will be, can we get that extra income coming in? We're operating very differently, obviously, to how we used to operate. Far fewer staff on site at the moment, so the majority of my team is still furloughed. But yes, the news yesterday was great because actually having a theatre where you can't put anything theatrical on is just a little bit heartbreaking, really. We often have visitors who come here and who want to do their bit of Hamlet on the stage, and I was at the point of going, I'd have to stop that. There's no live performances. You're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, so it's a bit difficult getting very theatrical with someone going around spraying the stage at the same time. I mean, have you worked out the numbers? You're obviously going to be restricted on what your capacity is. Are the costs going to outweigh the income you're bringing in?
So right from quite early in lockdown, we knew that we had pretty much lost all the season we had advertised for two reasons. One of which, the costs were too big to achieve social distancing on stage and backstage, and also the finances weren't going to stack up because we clearly were unlikely to be opening at full capacity. So we hold normally between 700 and 800 people, depending on the show. So quite quickly, I started looking at what we could put on the stage. Actually, what work could we give to performers, backstage teams, designers, directors that we could then afford to do on a much reduced capacity. We're opening in fact, we've got our first seated show on Monday, which is a storytelling performance, actually, for which we used to sell 800 tickets. We're opening that on 150 just because it's our first go at putting an audience into the theatre. But we're looking then over the next 2 or 3 weeks to build that probably to about 300. But we won't be releasing that number straight away. We'll do some shows capped at 200 and then 250 so that we get used to actually putting that audience in. We used to use the word packing for our audience. It shows how we used to fit them in. I used to tell people off for using that word, but actually, so getting the audience in their household bubbles with the right space around them. I think we're going to end up at about 330 as the max once we've got going, and that will actually include, if you've been to our theatre, you've seen our stage. People who haven't, we've got a sort of circular area on our stage, and then we've got a large flat area. And what I'm actually doing for most of the shows is, because we're programming one-man shows, very small cast shows, 2 or 3 four-handers, very small gigs, will be to play the performers just on the circle area, which means we can actually see extra audience on the rest of the stage. We started calling them the stagelings, people, so they'll just sit on the flat floor of the stage, but it just gives us a few extra. So you're right, it has been about trying to find product that we can put on that stage, which is financially viable at those numbers.
And have you been able to reduce costs? I mean, I presume you get a lot of people working for you who are doing it as volunteers, but, have you laid people off?
No, so we are 100% employed. We don't work with any volunteers. We normally, this time of year, we have about 85 on the payroll. We actually, when we hit lockdown, we were just over 70. So I've still got about 50 of those furloughed at the moment. But they all work quite variable hours. So only about 25 to 30 people work here year round. We are open in the winter, but we don't have a huge amount of work. So we've got a lot of flexibility within our contracts at the moment, which is obviously really helpful going forward.
Do you think that your customers and your regulars or your visitors will be happy to pay that bit extra? Because putting prices up is always a dodgy thing, isn't it? You're never quite sure. Should I?
Yeah, absolutely. But we operate dynamic pricing here, so we've got that flexibility if we need to then adjust that accordingly. The short answer actually is I don't know. We're literally going on sale with our first two shows probably in about 2 hours' time. So if we were doing this later on today, I would probably be able to give you an answer to that. There's an awful lot of audience research projects that have gone on through lockdown looking at what consumers are looking for and what they're looking forward to doing. And it certainly feels like there's quite a demand there for live performance. Our website this morning has gone completely mad since the announcement yesterday.
I also heard that you had the request from the BBC for the programme to be done from your theatre. Of course, they're getting in on the act too. One person who's looking a bit jealous is the actor Adam James, because Adam, of course, while the outdoor theatre gears up again, the traditional theatre still doesn't have that curtain up date. Now, I know you also do film and TV. You've done Dr. Foster, Belgravia, I May Destroy You, etc. And you've written a blog for us, and you and I have talked about this all last week. What the figures were, what the announcement meant in terms of the 1.6 billion for the arts and culture and so on. What's your feeling now that you hear that the outdoor theatres are going back? Are you more hopeful?
Obviously it's thrilling that the package finally came through. Clearly it's going to be late for some institutions. I don't know where it leaves places like the Nuffield Southampton, whether they will receive money in time to survive the closure of that building. And yes, of course, it's thrilling that any theatre can happen outdoors or indoors. But as we've said, as welcome as the package is, there's still glaring gaps in government policy as to how we can practice and create theatre indoors in the way we once were, with these restrictions on social distancing. It's all well and good Oliver Dowden giving us a 5-point plan that is sort of almost wholly redundant, suggesting we start rehearsals, but without any sort of financial support or planning as to when these shows can open. It all seemed a little futile. And there's also slightly confusing messaging from the government, and it feels that there's sort of one rule for them and one rule for us. So we see images of sort of planes and trains relatively packed out, people sitting hugger-mugger, all facing one direction. And I don't know why that can happen, and yet it can't happen in a theatre when arguably we've got the same protocols in place in terms of people's details and track and trace, should that be required through box office and ticket sales. So it feels great that the support is there, and that we're not going to lose potentially as many theatres as was predicted, with as many as 70% of theatres without any financial investment looked like they were going under by December, which is a really shocking number. So that's great that that's going to happen. It's just, how can it happen? And part of the frustration is we're such a productive and lucrative sector, and the only reason we've had to close is because of the coronavirus. It's not for lack of being lucrative and productive. The minute we're allowed to go back to rehearse and create productions in the way that we once were, I can't see why we wouldn't be as prolific. There's, of course, the problem of people's own nervousness about returning to those venues, and how we overcome that. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how you get on down at the Minack Theatre. I'd be really curious to see how you sell. I'm hoping you'll sell brilliantly. Sorry, Liz.
And I think we all do that, but I'm just wondering what you both think, because Adam, I think there's something like £112 billion comes in from the arts and culture sector, 1.3 billion in ticket sales for the West End theatres alone last year. Does it, both of you, do you feel that given a package of 1.6 billion, there's a lack of understanding just how important this sector is to the UK economy?
Zoe, I'll let you go. You're probably far more.
I think the industry obviously has to welcome the 1.57 billion, whatever, that came through last week. I think there's a huge challenge around how that is then distributed across organisations and across the country. And I think, echoing what you were saying earlier, I think there's a huge concern about how the freelance sector is going to benefit from that package as well going forward. I would also actually add to Adam's point earlier, the other anomaly that I've not got my head around at all is the fact cinemas can open. So if cinemas can open with an audience inside, why can't indoor theatres open, even if not at big scale shows initially? But it just makes little sense to me, really. The logic behind that. Have I actually answered your question properly, Liz? I'm sorry. I went straight off on a tangent, didn't I?
No, that doesn't matter. Adam, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that.
Well, the truth is, Liz, I mean, we're all grateful for the investment, but you're right. I think in the long term, it will prove not an overly substantial amount, especially when you look at our sort of European counterparts. I think France have in place a €7 billion package and another program to continue to pay for self-employed artists until next August. So, country comparisons I know are a little erroneous, but I think the proof will be in the pudding. We'll see where we are 6 months from now. But what is paramount is they need to clarify a way for traditional theatres to operate, because without that, nothing's going to happen.
Well, the point that Simon made was that the Regent, he looked on the open air theatre at Regent's Park and he discovered that the season was cancelled. Now, Adam was telling me last week that a lot of the pantos have already been cancelled. You can't just claw that back. Where do you start, even when you do get an opening date, to rebuild again?
Well, I guess some of this funding, depending on how it's distributed, will maybe help fill that gap. Sam Mendes has also come up with a very useful idea of cutting the tax for theatres from 20% to 50%, which could also help stem some of that flow. But you're right, without being able to schedule and program productions that bring in real cash, I don't know where that leaves a lot of those venues. And particularly
do you think there'll be problems with funding for different programs and shows will be difficult to come by once this is over and once the theatres have been, returned to normal, or as normal as damn it?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, this government has been brilliant at supporting the arts historically, and yet in the last 10 years, it's grown by 47%. So we are incredibly resourceful, but I would hate for that to be taken as a given. There's this sort of idea that, if you squeeze the arts, they'll find a way of surviving. And inevitably, it is an institution or an environment that has a lot of creative people and a lot of creative minds and find a way of doing that. It would be great not to have to continue to survive in those ways, and that funding could become a sort of regularly constant and well-supported part of our culture. I think everybody has benefited from the grassroots of what of theatre creates. Everybody's had their streaming services, I'm sure, have blitzed loads of box sets. And I think people all too easily forget that the feeding of those monstrous shows and big successful shows on Netflix and Disney all really start from the theatre. If I use The Crown for an example, almost all of its writers, its cast and directors all cut their teeth in theatre. So if we lose that feeding system, or that growing ground, I think in the long term, generationally, we'll find a real dearth in talent across the board.
And I would, there's almost an opportunity in this funding to sort of reset how the funding does work. It would be very easy for 1.57 billion to just disappear into keeping buildings, the buildings open that have always been open and running in exactly the same way. And actually, there's a question there about, is this an opportunity for the sector to steer maybe more of that money into the grassroots if there is a way of doing that, and supporting, from the bottom upwards in a different way. I don't want to be the person at DCMS that has to work out how that happens, to be honest. And I'm incredibly relieved that I sit here running a charitable theatre that doesn't receive a penny of public subsidy, because we're thankful that we have the visitors that come and visit us, and that gives us enough money to be able to do what we want to do, including producing our own work. But I do think it's a huge challenge, and I think there's a possibility here that the temptation is going to be to fund what's happened before. Obviously, timescales are very, very tight. It's a really, really tricky one. And in terms of how that's then going to rock forward for the future, in terms of what those organisations, once you've saved them now, you're committed to carrying on saving them for the future.
That's a very good point. Can I just bring in Jenny Baish, the landlady of the Barley Mow in Maidenhead, and Sam Harrison, who is the owner of Sam's Riverside in Hammersmith. Both of them joined us a few weeks ago. And of course, Sam owns a restaurant. He opened again on Saturday. Jenny has got the pub, and she opened again on Saturday. So what's it been like for the people who have fully got back to work? And, and what do you think about the plight of the theatres that you've been hearing Adam and Zoe talk about? Sam, thoughts?
Hi, Liz. Listen, first and foremost, I'm just thrilled to be open and to have smiley customers back through the doors. It's been a really bizarre opening week, getting used to all of the guidelines, procedures, our operations. But first and foremost, we're serving people again. We're cooking food. We're pouring wine. The tills are ringing, which is obviously very encouraging. I hear Adam and your other guests talking, and I just hope that they get to open as quickly as possible. I totally agree with Adam that there's no logic behind having cinemas reopening, having gyms reopening, having packed, in fact, having restaurants reopen if we can't reopen theatres as well. But the most encouraging thing for me as a restaurant operator is that customers are booking, they want to return, we've got the tills going again.
Jenny, did the customers return to the pub?
They did. We had a good opening on the Saturday and Sunday. It was a good start, but the weather hasn't been the kindest to us. We decided to open up outside to start with because it's only a wet lead pub, we don't do food. So we thought the easiest place, we put a couple of marquees, just the roofs on. But by sort of 8 o'clock, they were freezing. They said, we're going to have to go. So after I thought, bit of a quiet day, we're going to have to let some in. So we've now got 5 tables inside. So, maximum of probably 25 people if there's so many people per bubble. But that's like about a quarter of what we should be doing. We should be packing them in.
And that's the point, Jenny, isn't it, that we've been banging on about? The government say we're being led by the science. So in other words, none of us can argue because we don't know about the science. And it's great, we've heard that the premises are being opened and money's coming in. But how long can you go on for on reduced capacity, whether it be your hairdressers, your pub, your restaurant, your theatre? How long are these restrictions going to be in place? We just don't know.
Well, exactly. And especially, as we come up to October, November, it's going to be freezing. And they are just not going to want to go and sit in the garden. And if we've only got 20, 25 people indoors, it's catastrophic. It will just kill us, especially because the pub companies are giving no help on paying rent.
Jenny, any tips for Zoe and Adam? Because, of course, they're thinking about what opening up is going to be like. You guys have already been through it.
I've definitely found, and I guess every establishment is different, but and Mickey touched on it. Obviously, we're running at about 50% capacity. I haven't quite had time to sort of really analyse what that means in terms of finances, which we'll do on Monday after the weekend. But in simple terms, I think we'll just about be breaking even. I found that there's a real mixture. Although people seem very keen to come out, people really want to know what our procedures, how we're following the government guidelines, and it really is about confidence. I think if the customer believes in you, trusts in you, and feels safe in your hands, then they're willing to return. And we're finding that already. I've got people who came earlier in the week. I think they were surprised by how normal it can feel, even with screens and staff in masks. And they're willing to support that and support you. And having seen that actually they can still experience the enjoyment and pleasure of being in a restaurant, that they're rebooking. So I think, for me as a restaurateur, we've just got to spread the word that we're here and doing things a little bit differently, but fundamentally normally.
I suppose it's about that messaging.
It is. It's getting the message out to the customers. We've done a lot of Facebook work, sort of advertising what procedures we've got in place, what they're going to expect, so that it's not all a big shock when you're stopped at the door and asked to sanitize your hands. These things aren't difficult, but it's just getting people used to the new normal.
Can you afford to have someone at the door telling people to do that, or is that just the bar staff's one of their chores that they wouldn't normally do?
The first few days, it was just ourselves doing it, sort of, because I've got obviously one person behind the bar, and then we were having one at the door. But going forward, we haven't. The last few days, we've had the bar staff pretty much doing it all, because we've only a tiny pub. We just say, stop there, do your hands, come and tell me your name, give me your phone number. Now go stand there, have your drink, go outside.
Mickey, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's our problem, is that we're doing 50% of the covers, but at the moment, and maybe we're being a bit overcautious, but where I would normally have one host on the door, it almost requires 3 people, because I've got to have somebody at the front door. If we've got a reservation for you, we have your details for track and trace. If you're a walk-in, then we need to get your details for track and trace. Somebody else kind of needs to explain the procedures and the one-way system that we're operating. So it
doesn't exactly flow, does it?
No, it's very labour intensive. And actually, I mean, the only way we're trying to make obviously we're taking these things very seriously, but we're sort of saying to people, listen, let's get past this entrance period, and once you're inside, then relax and have fun, because there is this whole sort of arrival procedure. But it requires a lot of staff, and so we're almost running with a higher staff bill than we were before, but we're doing less business.
I was going to say to you, exponentially, how much have your costs gone up compared with the measures being brought in? Have you been able to gauge that at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, our fixed overheads are roughly the same. Are the same. I think our wages at the moment are about 30% up. Now, we will obviously get used to these procedures and systems, and we'll be able to tweak that down. But at the moment, I mean, we found it very, I don't know if Jenny would agree, we found it that first weekend very physically and emotionally draining, because, first and foremost, we serve warm food and cold beer, but now you're having to do all of that behind a screen. You're having to answer a lot of questions. You're having to get people to fill out information. There's a lot more going on. And also you want to do it all correctly. So I think things will soften and relax, but at the moment there's definitely an extra cost to us.
Can I ask all 4 of you? We're not there yet. So even those who are open most certainly aren't there yet. And we don't know how many will be able to carry on with the reduced margins. Zoe, you're up to full gear tomorrow morning. So the rest of your day is going to be very busy. Adam, you're still thinking about what it means for the whole sector. What do you want to say to government? What do you want to say to those people who have got the money bags? What's the one thing you want them to do to help you?
End social distancing. I mean, they keep talking to us about the science, and I've been reading around the subject a lot, and without going completely off subject, it it is totally nonsensical at the moment. The whole process in which a lot of these businesses are after being reopened and the protocols they have to follow make absolutely no sense to where we currently find ourselves with regard to the epidemic. And it's so prohibitive for every business to operate fully. And I think until there's a huge rethink about that, we're going to have to keep, bumbling along in these fits and starts, which is not ideal for anybody. And the experience as well is
sorry,
and social distancing.
And social distancing, Jenny.
Well, I think that the help that the government has given recently hasn't helped us at all in the pub, especially being a wet-led pub. We don't do food, so everyone's coming in, I can have 15% off my beer. Well, no, you can't, because beer's not included.
Well, one thing you learn, Jenny, when it comes to science, it's a bit like economists. You stick 12 economists in a room, you'll come up with 13 different views. Absolutely. And most of them will be wrong. I mean, that's part of the problem. Everyone's an expert in this country, and very few of us get it right.
Well, they haven't helped. I mean, they haven't helped pubs at all. The best thing they could do is cut some duty of the beer duty, and that's really the only thing that's going to help us, because they brought out a new code to help the landlord tenants, but then made it voluntary. So it's a bit like a chocolate teapot. What use is that?
Zoe, what's the one thing you'd like?
Yeah. Do you know what? Obviously, ending social distancing, that would be fantastic. But actually, for me, there's been a whole thing about, can you allow us as business owners to use our common sense and to do our own risk assessments? I'm finding, the guidance is so specific. And actually, there's times when you think, yes, does it apply in the open air? Does it apply? But, we run businesses. I do risk assessments all the time. I have a theatre which has 100 steps to reach the stage, and none of them are the same size as any other. I can assess risk, and please don't just tell me every last detail of how I need to run my business, because actually that's even more time consuming, trying to make sure I've ticked all those boxes properly.
And Sam, last word to you.
I definitely agree with that. I mean, in restaurants, food safety and the safety of our customers is what we do anyway. On the opening weekend, I had the police and local licensing and someone from the council visit me 3 times. And
really?
They didn't seem to know what they were looking for, because there were no strict guidelines. But they were just sort of slightly amazed by, actually, we had customers in, and I felt they were trying to catch us out. And
bet none of them ever worked in a pub in the first place.
And 3 of them standing at the door, not really helping the customer feel confident. So yeah, I mean, the guidelines are so vague for restaurants. So I think that the message should be: drop project fear, get out, trust your restaurants, trust your pubs, trust your theatres. We know how to look after people.
I wonder, Simon, if we need to really start thinking about when we start talking up the confidence, because everybody's mentioned confidence, and if people don't have the confidence to come out and start spending, I know that obviously there's one school of thought says we need to be saving much more, and that's great, but the Treasury would like us to spend. It will be down to confidence.
Yes, that's right. But I think that the confidence is all linked to the pandemic. And the fact of the matter is, this pandemic is still here. And, we are maybe going through a bit of a lull at the moment, but there is evidence in other countries that it comes back. And I think the government is being cautious in as much that it is not prepared to completely reopen the economy at this stage. And it probably won't happen really properly until next year, because they need to see whether there's going to be a second wave or not in the autumn. And, if you think the lockdown this time was bad and they have to lock down again, well, we're looking at catastrophe, basically.
Oh, that's a pretty gloomy way on which to end the podcast. So I'm not going to end it there, because Daniel Granger is a bit more optimistic, I think, than some of the people we've heard from. Now, Daniel is the Nottingham hairdresser who trained about 700 hairdressers online during lockdown. He's back with his scissors in his hand. He, of course, opened on Saturday as well. As I said, there were queues outside barber shops and hairdressers all over England. And let's not forget Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland are all opening at different dates. But Daniel told us how good it felt.
Hi guys, glad to be back. And thank you so much for having me. I just want to kind of tell you about the experience of opening Daniel Granger Hairdressing in Northampton for the first time after a very, very long time. We have had such a successful start. On Saturday the 4th of July, I opened up to my staff and my staff only, where they come in and experience the new journey. I had team training of how the new systems are working and everything that we're going to do to keep us safe and our clients safe and our business open. We have a 26% increase in new clients and we are bursting at the seams. We will also put our prices up and every client is happy to pay it because of the upgrade of service. It has been very successful so far, so good. We have had a few bumps on the ride, a few bumps on the road. And it's been a ride of waves of emotion over the last 3 days. But we got to the end of Tuesday at 8 o'clock at night and our backs were hurting from the positions that we haven't stood in for a long time. And we all gave each other a round of applause. And I hope every other salon out there is doing exactly the same. Business is good. We're back on our feet and hopefully the economy will do the same. I'm ignoring the negative and just focusing on all the positives that we've got. The thing that I would say I miss the most is being able to give my clients a massive cuddle. I've had clients cry on me because they haven't seen me for that long and I've cut their hair since I was 16 years old. I still cut them today and I'm 38. And all they want to do is hug me and they couldn't wait to see me. Some of the haircuts that have come in, some of the home disasters, some that have left it alone and let their greys grow out. It's been incredible to transform these people and see their self-esteem just light up. And we do that. We give them confidence and we give them the story. And we've shared our fears. We've shared our stories of COVID-19. My staff are well. I'm well. My clients are amazing. I'll see you all soon. Thank you so much for listening.
I want to give him a round of applause.
How much does a haircut cost these days, Liz?
Mickey, don't worry. You need to start spending in order to help the economy get back on its feet. But hairdressers is not your strong point. I think you should go and see Jenny in the pub. You should go and see Jenny in the pub. Yeah, anyway, so time for us to go. But there's a note of optimism to end on, and Daniel is doing his best to give as much confidence as possible. So Zoe, really, really good luck when it all kicks off because it's going to be really busy. Adam, we'll talk to you before you go back on stage, I hope.
Yes.
Jenny. As soon as we can get down to Maidenhead, I think we should bring the whole team.
Drinks are on,
and
Liz.
Sam, send us over the menu. We'll be there as soon as we can, as we can all get there. And thanks everybody so much for joining us, Mickey. It's been brilliant week. I wonder what next week's going to hold.
Well, it's been a busy week for sure. Yeah. But as Daniel said, you keep the hopes flying. And hopefully we'll come out of this in one piece. But we've got a long way to go.
And we'll hear from you again, Simon, next week. Thanks, everybody, ever so much. Thank you for joining us.